So this is the date 34 years ago, today exactly, on the 9th of July 1989. Two Bangladeshis were murdered in an attack carried out on them in the flat, in the Flower and Dean Walk, which runs parallel to Brick Lane. And Mr. Esmoth Ali died immediately, while his close relation, Watir Ali, was injured, but he survived for a time, the length of time he lived for, I'll have to check. So we shall be talking about the campaign for justice for Mr. Esmoth Ali and Watir Ali in this edition. Also, we'll be talking about the criminal against humanity, George Osborne. Now, George Osborne has got himself in the mainstream British media, where he's been pictured with his just married wife. Now, this wife of his is a former aide to him while he was in government. Now, George Osborne is a criminal who has been in government as the UK finance minister while the criminal David Cameron has been prime minister. Now, as the finance minister in the name of the United Kingdom, this criminal, George Osborne, was, of course, mainly responsible for the allocation of funds for various departments in the UK government. And the department that is called, abbreviated to DWP, which is officially called the Department for Work and Pensions, which is a disgrace. I call it deprivation for the D and want for the W and poverty for P. So the DWP, I have reorganized their deprivation, want, and poverty creation by the UK government itself, UK Parliament itself, and UK big business criminals. Now, one of the things that George Osborne did was to control the entire policy of benefits, welfare benefits that people in no income or very low income or people with disabilities absolutely need and needed in order to survive day to day. So he, in collusion with Ian Dracula Duncan Smith, created a murderous atmosphere operated through the machine of the DWP, whereby the ration, that is, severely limited the amount of money that the most urgently dependent people needed. So when they withheld the payment to the people who absolutely needed the money to survive, many of the people had no recourse to any other source of. And so the inevitably, out of desperation and having no support at all, many of these people committed suicide, which was the intended consequence that George Osborne's policy operated, executed through Ian Dracula Duncan Smith was. And the chief executive, the permanent secretary at the DWP for the longest period, was a criminal who absolutely, in a typically evil way, reflected the criminal agenda of George Osborne and Ian Dracula Evil Duncan Smith. So the statistics, the actual number of people they murdered by enforcing suicide is still not known. But let's check a sample. So this one is one of the items in the Guardian. Well, let's say this one, and this one is dated. It's 3 years old, and this one is dated the 7th of February 2020. And it says, which is complete understatement of the number of people. At least 69 suicides links to DWP's handling of benefit claims. And then it says Watchdog warns true number of cases where claimants took own lives as a result of DWP actions could be far higher. The stress should be far. 3 cases of suicides linked to DWP's handling of benefits. Have you been affected by changes to disability welfare payments? That is the Guardian's kind of side question. And the intro to that particular piece says families and campaigners have demanded a public inquiry after a government watchdog found that at least 69 suicides could have been linked to problems with benefit claims over the last 6 years. Now, that is the Guardian being so typically fucking stupid. It doesn't come across as if it is blaming the government. It comes across fluid, as if the claimants themselves were responsible. Amid anger from the loved ones of some of those who took their lives in circumstances where difficulties with the Department for Work and Pensions played a role. The National Audit Office report said that the true number of benefits claim linked, I'll read that again. The National Audit Office report said that the true number of deaths linked to claims could be far higher. Joy Love, the mother of Jodie Whiting, a disabled parent with a history of mental illness who took her life 3 years ago after her benefits were stopped, told The Guardian, that is, Joy Love told The Guardian, that without a full public inquiry into benefit related deaths, there was a danger that nothing will change and these tragedies would keep happening. Now, let me just get back to this phrase, public inquiry. Fuck public inquiries. This is a product of the brainwashing that Joy Lab suffers from. Public inquiries don't fucking change anything. Public inquiries in Britain are the biggest stumbling block against serious overdue changes to the bureaucracy. And they are absolute blocks stopping any fairness, any justice. And on this campaign, I have discussed many times, world exclusively, analytically, evidentially, factually, originally, that public inquiries are staged stunts to divert attention of the ordinary public from the latest scandal concerning the murderous negligence and contempt shown by the executive to the victims in society, or whatever remains of society. The public inquiries also are preempted and prevented from looking into the actual evidence, because the terms of reference of any public inquiries are set by the government. So the public inquiries into the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence in April 1993 in Eltham in southeast London has produced fuck all, no change. The public inquiries into the so-called Brixton demonstration and protests of 1981, fronted by the now deceased High Court judge, Supreme Court judge, whatever, Leslie Scarman, produced fuck all. The public inquiry that has just been completed, I think, or just been coming to a conclusion or whatever, or completion, into the massacre of 72 people at Grenfell Tower is a fuck all. So anyone who talks about public inquiries in the United Kingdom is, of course, not really aware of what they're talking about. I think this is a reflex produced by the psychological uncertainty and insecurity on the part of the people who are reportedly calling for public inquiries about anything, that they have to make some kind of conventional reference to something so that they can come across as being intelligent. Because if they were really intelligent and really possess the skills and the capacities to intellectually understand how the criminals operate the state, they would ever, never call for a public inquiry. The only way things change and have changed in the United Kingdom, public versus the government, the executive, is by real political action, not party political action, but real street action. Now, this Kudila campaign, of course, has produced one very significant evidence of defeating the UK central government over the Crossrail agenda to dig Brick Lane out of existence. We succeeded where the popular councillors, the revolters, if you like, of 1921, failed. They did make the point of representing their voters, but they failed in the immediate immediate campaign. So if you go back to the Manchester area protests where people are murdered, the Peterloo action, you will find that they failed as well. So for hundreds of years in England, which has simultaneously had empire in Africa and Asia, for hundreds of years, the English domestic people have been repressed, have been tortured, have been harassed, have been disenfranchised from having a say in public life. Against all of those backgrounds, hundreds of years, what the Kudila campaign actually did between, say, 2003 until 2010 was absolutely stunningly unique. Not only did we not get entangled in getting any of our campaigners arrested by the police, we didn't actually institute any real litigation in any of the English courts existing at the time. So, what we did solely was to rely on my constitutional law, ethical law, advocacy abilities, and strategic skills. And I mobilized the local community around those skills which I then advocated. And the advocacy took place in public and against some of the most corrupt licensed law traders, in other words, barristers, QCs at the time, now they're KC, K and Q, change depending on the man or woman in place at the monarch. So, this is the significance of the Khudilar campaign. And the other thing is that the Khudilar campaign benefited people that are still benefiting, but all the outlets that have been in operation in the name of the community that we have been defending and protecting, all these outlets have been absolutely irrelevant. For a start, the one satellite television outlet called Channel Slaves, they call it Channel S, but I call it Channel Slaves. Channel Slaves is founded by a convicted fraudster and criminal, multiple criminal, convicted criminal fraudster. So therefore, it is not an outlet that can be relied on to tell the truth, purvey the truth. And it is an accomplice to the corrupt agenda for having the corrupt elected mayor post at the expense of the people of Tower Hamlets. So that doesn't carry any significance because, but that is the one that is claimed to be the most numerously watched outlet by the Bangladeshis in the United Kingdom. And it didn't do anything. It follows that we didn't need them. It follows that we didn't fucking need them because they had no clue and we would not have any purpose, legal purpose, ethical purpose, democratic purpose being represented in any of their contents. The lesser ones are even more useless: print and broadcast. And it also follows that the elected councillors in place at the time, during the time at the relevant local borough council Tower Hamlets in London, were politically dead, morally dead, intellectually dead. Okay? As were the members of parliament. The only occasions that part of the time George Galloway came to life as being apparently relevant in the fact that he referred to the Crossrail hole and he reluctantly acknowledged, reluctantly because he's a dishonest racist and his racist scriptwriters are absolutely typically racist, dishonest morons. So they reluctantly acknowledged the Khudilar campaign, but they didn't voluntarily, spontaneously did that. So what you can look at is the list of all the established individuals or post holders. They became irrelevant by their own stupidity, ignorance, selfishness, and jealousy. And we steadfastly continued the campaign from the conception of the campaign in December 2003 till the Crossrail criminals, plotting the whole, abandoned the whole plot, whenever that date was actually. All right? That is how we did that. Now, the other thing that we have not been talking about is the racists being hired, according to all the internal community sources that we have been aware of. The racists who attacked Mr. Esmoth Ali and his close relative Watir Ali, I didn't know either of them. There was no reason to know them because there was nothing going on in terms of their engagement in the community in any way. They were ordinary members of the Bangladeshi community living at the address of Brick Lane, which is parallel to Brick Lane, Flower and Dean Walk. Whoever hired them, the criminals who carried out the murderous attack, obviously has got away so far, as have the murderers. But, and I didn't know about the murders and murderous attack until afterwards. And the following weekend, they were attacked on the 9th of July 1989. And there was a rally, not organized by me on that occasion, that one. A rally organized by whoever took place at the Altavali Park. And the idea was that participants in the rally would form themselves into a procession and march down Brick Lane into the Bethnal Green Road and end the march outside of the then Bethnal Green police station, which was in the Bethnal Green Road. That was the plan. That was the plan, not spelled out at the beginning of March, but it became clear as the march progressed or moved. I was there just as a supporter of the campaign, not as an organizer. And secondly, nobody, whoever organized that rally, didn't contact me. The fact that they didn't contact me was not because they didn't know that I existed or that they didn't think that I could help. In fact, the opposite. They did know that I existed and also were very, very poisonously jealous because they thought that if I got in board, then I would become famous. Fuck them. I have been at the forefront of political action in context for longer than these morons have been biologically alive. And I don't need to get extra points to my CB because I have no CB that I want to carry with me as part of the proof that I am an active community activist. I'm not. Any moron, the creeps that ever use the phrase community activist about me, of course, every time they say that, they commit a crime. I have never been a community fucking activist, you shitbags. I am the original campaign organizer, original defender of the community, original advocate on multiple levels, unlike any other human being that exists. You fucking shitbags. To call me community activist is an offense, grotesque offense. So, what happened on the Saturday, the 15th of July to the 1989? Halfway or part of the way into the march into Bethnal Green Road, relatively young members of the march were picked up by the police. I think about two or three. I wasn't leading the march, but I was taking the pictures, which is what I actually do, have been doing. Millions of pictures, original, exclusive. And at one point, when we passed, anyone who is familiar with the Bethnal Green Road will know the main Tesco metro, which is situated going east, situated on the left side of the road. And the police station, Bethnal police station, is maybe 100, 200 yards from there. So there was increasing agitation in the participants, among the participants, concerned about the arrest of the protesters. And they wanted the protesters to be released. But the Metropolitan Police, that was on the Saturday, the 15th of July, 1989, the Metropolitan Police was not releasing them. So just as we approached and the march became nearly parallel to the Bethnal Green police station, I noticed that there was agitation among the people, but the so called leaders who had been said to have organized this either had disappeared, they couldn't be found, or at least one or two of them, if they were physically visible, were just standing on the pavement as if they were observers, nothing to do with the demonstration. Now, this was a deadlock that should not have been created. Why? Because if you create a deadlock in a spontaneous demonstration, then whatever impact the demonstration had dissipates. So I took up, whoever had the microphone, loud hailer, I took that and I began speaking. And the first thing I said was, then let's sit down, peacefully sit down on the middle of the road, Bethnal Green Road, and demand the release of the protesters. And the people observed what I said and they sat down. Now, some of the pictures of that are in the local newspaper at the time, the East London Idiotizer. It clearly shows who was leading the action. I was not being a fucking community activist, you fucking morons. I was leading it as I have been leading every single defense of the community, including the conception of the idea of the UK Bangladeshi community. Without me, it would have not existed. It would have become a Bengali extension, which would have nothing, no meaning at all. You fuckers. So, from that moment onwards, we would not go, we would not stand up, and the police brought in paramilitary reinforcements. and they began mass arrests. When they started the mass arrests, one of the things that is intended to be the purpose or the result of mass arrests without any notice or without any communication. The police clearly saw that I was leading the action. They could have asked me my opinion as to how to proceed, but they didn't. They saw that the people were listening to me, so they showed contempt and they started arresting people en masse. Eventually, they arrested about 50 people. So you can see there were hundreds of people there. And when they arrested the people, 50 or so, there was unrest among those who weren't arrested. And the people who were able to speak were outraged with whoever had organized this demonstration. So they wanted to go and find them and beat them up. Eventually, we ended up in Brick Lane and we had a kind of consequent upon the arrests and so on, had a gathering. And the gathering ended after a number of people spoke with anger and outrage, but with no direction. I shall come back to that after I talk about George Osborne. Now, what happened with George Osborne? And I was talking earlier. Remember, I was talking earlier about the. Let's see what we have posted earlier today, early hours of today. I wrote George Osborne, the UK finance minister, who made the DWP the main UK government machine to, in effect, carry out massacres of the disabled, the most vulnerable, who were systematically coerced into committing suicide after being denied vital welfare support they desperately needed. Now, then you continue to the next segment of this sentence. George Osborne is being given huge space by the British media on the corruptly confected propaganda lie that he, Osborne, has had a poison pen attack on him. It's clearly Osborne has orchestrated this propaganda. And whoever the poison pen attacker was must have been connected with Osborne, the criminal himself. And then there was this very unconvincing looking elderly woman pouring some kind of paint over Osborne and his just newly married wife. Neither incident is of any consequence whatsoever. And neither incident has been reported by any of the mainstream outlets in the United Kingdom by recalling the role of this criminal when he was actually in post as the finance minister. Now, when he left the job, because Cameron resigned after the Brexit result, and Osborne resigned with him, and he was not appointed or kept in the cabinet by Theresa May, who followed Cameron as the prime minister. So, what this criminal Osborne did was to get one job, then another one. Eventually, he got about 8 separate jobs, this fucking criminal. 8 jobs at all at the same time. Unheard of. Absolutely impossible. And the fact that this criminal was allowed to do that without any condemnation by the media, without any condemnation by any fucking members of parliament, shows that the fucking United Kingdom parliament doesn't fucking exist. The media is nothing to do with the free press or whatever. So you go back to the BBC, the front page of the Sunday Times today, which is continuing the coverage that the Sun started. And this one had a BBC crisis over star paying teen for sex photos. That's their main story. Fuck the Sunday Times. How can that be the story? There are so many things going wrong that should be covered as the main news. But they are being ignored. For example, the allocation by Biden of cluster bombs to this parasite in Ukraine is an escalation of the war between Ukraine and the US and Russia. There is nothing in the papers talking about the war that should be ended. No analysis, no opposition to the war. So we shall be continuing on that another time. Now, going back to Esmoth Ali and the arrest of about 50 people in the Bethnal Road by the police, paramilitary police. And we had the meeting at an address in Hanbury Street. And the meeting ended after the people who took part in the actual demonstration expressed anger and outrage at the police behavior. And that's it. There was no action, follow up action agreed. Now, the people who had been arrested, eventually the number came down to about 40. Almost all of them Bangladeshis, and almost all of them aged under 30, with one or two exceptions. And there was a magistrates court based in Stepney, where they had a preliminary appearance. And the sole cheater, there are some of these Bangladeshi mental slaves had become enslaved to is a woman called Cherry Macmillan. It's a white woman called Cherry Macmillan. Cherry Macmillan is a racist criminal, and whatever she said, I have no recollection of because I was not inside the court. I was doing the organizing of the demonstration outside the court. And the only person that actually helped me prepare the banner for that particular appearance was the late, now deceased Shahabuddin Ahmad Bilal. Now, Shahabuddin Ahmad Bilal later featured, few years later, with me after the September 1993 murderous attack on Qudus Ali in the commercial road by ISIS. It was Bilal that gave me the basic information about where Qudus Ali's home was and where he come from, etc., etc. So to and also Bilal was also part of the first committee elected at the public meeting organized on the 31st of July 1989 and held at the Barnard Center. So Bilal was the secretary, I was the chair, with a few others on the committee. It was left to me to continue, which I did. And Bilal was there, but Bilal didn't have the quality of consistency, so he hardly ever kept his word. So I did not depend on him being around. But his heart was there in the campaign. Now, the ethnicity linked outlets, anything in particular, the weekly newspaper that had been started not long before that, with the frontage being given to the criminal who has recently passed away, Abdal Kuffar Chaudhry. They completely boycotted the foundation, the formation of the Committee for Bangladeshi's Rights in the United Kingdom. And yet it was the Committee for Bangladeshi's Rights in the United Kingdom that I founded with the support of about 100 or so representatives of the organizations on the 31st of July 1989 that carried out the campaign for the following 2 years. Campaign mainly demonstrations outside the various magistrates' courts, where those who were arrested on the 15th of July 1989 were being charged and processed. Nobody else was there. So much so that my picture demonstrating on my own appeared on BBC London News. We shall be continuing on this anniversary later today and also in the other editions because it's absolutely phenomenal what happened. And I did that. On the facts, I claim the credit. It was my moral duty, which I was pleased to do. But it also shows the complete slavish nature of the ranks of creeps and liars that pose within the community as various shades and grades of community leaders. Fuck them. So we shall be talking about all of those in due course. Now we are finishing, just temporarily finishing this one at about 50 minutes at 08:23 GMT on Sunday, 8th of July 2023.